On her very first day at work, she accidentally walked into the men's restroom, and within 60 seconds, she nearly got fired. But what she didn't know was that the man she ran into was the company's cold, no-nonsense CEO. And that moment was only the beginning of a love story no one saw coming. Before we begin the story, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Let's dive into the story together. It was barely 8:15 a.m., and the sun was already slicing through the mirrored glass walls of Smith Enterprises, one of those skyscrapers that made everything and everyone beneath it feel just a little bit smaller. Sarah Cole, new hire, age 25, was not small this morning. Not in presence, not in panic, and certainly not in pace. She barreled through the 27th floor hallway like a wind-up toy at full throttle, heels clicking, hair slightly frizzed, and eyes wide with that unmistakable look of, I'm late and life is over. First day, first meeting, and I'm gonna get fired before I even find the dang conference room. She muttered breathlessly under her breath, clutching her oversized tote like a life raft in a sea of mahogany doors and sleek glass panels. But then, disaster leveled up. A sharp, cramping twist hit her stomach like a bolt of lightning. She froze mid-stride, blinked twice, and scanned the corridor. Bathroom. Now. She spotted a door at the end of the hallway with a silver placard. Didn't really read it, didn't have time. She lunged toward it, shoved it open, and disappeared inside like a fugitive fleeing the scene of a crime. Relief. A sink. Soap. Paper towels. Civilization. Sarah exhaled deeply, her reflection in the mirror reminding her she still had a pulse. She splashed water on her face. The day could still be salvaged. Or so she thought. Because just as she reached for the hand dryer, a door behind her creaked open, and a man stepped out. A very tall, very composed man. His sleeves were rolled up, his shirt slightly open at the collar, and he held a charcoal gray blazer draped neatly over one arm. His other hand adjusted a silver cufflink with the kind of casual grace that only came from years of confidence or control. He paused when he saw her, and she paused too. Except her pause looked more like panic dressed in beige slacks. Their eyes locked. He blinked once. She blinked twice. Then, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry, this is the wrong room, isn't it?" She grabbed the first thing within reach, a roll of toilet paper, and instinctively raised it like a weapon. "Back off! I'm trained in soft tissue combat." He looked at her, then the toilet paper, then back at her. There was a long, incredulous silence, the kind where dignity goes to die. "You're in the men's room," he said flatly. She was already edging toward the exit, cheeks the color of a ripe tomato. "I didn't look at the sign. I had a stomach emergency. It was that or the hallway." He didn't speak, just stared, eyes narrowed, like a man trying to process whether this was a prank or his karma cashing in. As Sarah stumbled toward the door, nearly knocking over a mop bucket in the process, her eyes landed on a silver nameplate pinned to the front of his shirt. William Smith, Chief Executive Officer. Her stomach dropped again. Only this time it had nothing to do with digestion. Hooked in place, frozen in disbelief, she realized, I just threatened my new boss with a roll of Charmin. Then she fled. Just like that, she was gone, leaving behind nothing but the faint scent of panic and citrus soap. She thought the worst part of her day was over. But the man she just accidentally invaded? He wasn't just anyone. He was the CEO. And this was only the beginning. The boardroom on the 30th floor of Smith Enterprises was nothing short of intimidating. Clean lines, cold steel, soft lighting that somehow made the room feel both expensive and unforgiving. 12 men and women in tailored suits sat around a long walnut table, murmuring over printed agendas and digital tablets. Then the doors opened. William Smith entered. He didn't need to say a word. His presence did the speaking for him. Trim, precise, unreadable, every step of his Italian leather shoes echoed authority. He was the kind of man who didn't raise his voice, because he never had to. People leaned in when he spoke. They learned quickly that silence from William meant one of two things: approval or disappointment. He scanned the room, methodically, until his gaze hit her. Sarah. She sat halfway down the table, shoulders squared, tablet ready in her lap, trying hard to blend in, unsuccessfully. She looked painfully familiar. His steps slowed. Her breath caught. He tilted his head slightly, and there it was, a flicker of disbelief. "You?" he said, his voice cool. "You're the new interpreter?" Sarah's throat went dry. "Yes, sir," she managed, her voice just above a whisper. For a moment, no one spoke. The air thinned. The executives exchanged confused glances, sensing something unspoken unraveling between their CEO and the woman who clearly wasn't supposed to be the center of attention. William didn't say anything right away, but internally, gears were turning. How could it be her? The girl who barged into the men's room like a hurricane, now sitting in front of international stakeholders representing his company. What kind of twisted cosmic joke was this? But William Smith didn't do flustered. Not in meetings, not in life. So instead he took a step forward, smoothed the front of his jacket, and with an expression that gave away nothing, except a faint hint of cruel amusement, he looked her square in the eyes. "You have 1 week. Survive that, and you stay. Fail, and you walk yourself out of this building." His words were calm, but his tone made it clear. This wasn't a probation. It was a challenge. Sarah blinked. Hard. She wasn't sure if it was fear or fuel, but either way she wasn't about to run. Not again. Not in front of him. Not this time. What began as an accident in the men's room had just turned into a professional standoff. And in this office, there was only room for one person to win. By the end of her first official workday at Smith Enterprises, Sarah Cole already knew she'd stepped into a battlefield, just not the kind with swords and shields. No, this one came with triple-booked meetings, unreadable executive stares, and coffee so bitter it probably voided health insurance. It started innocently enough. A soft knock on her desk. A polite voice from the CEO's assistant. A file folder, thick and ominous, slid across the wood like a silent dare. "Mr. Smith would like this translated by noon," the assistant said, already walking away. Sarah blinked, flipped it open. 75 pages. German legal jargon, footnotes, charts, and it was 10:24 a.m. She looked around for a hidden camera. Didn't find one. Only a tiny echo of laughter, her own, because honestly, what else could she do? She got to work. That's what she did. She didn't complain, didn't groan. She powered through, one technical term at a time, with a half-eaten protein bar in one hand and a red pen in the other. By 12:01, the translated document was neatly stacked, clipped, and hand-delivered to Mr. Smith's desk. He didn't even glance up when she placed it down. Just muttered, "Thanks." And that was that. The next day, a last-minute 7:15 a.m. meeting, then another report, a video call with investors in Zurich, with zero prep. At some point, Sarah stopped keeping track. Every hour came with a new assignment. Every email felt like a trap wrapped in formality. She adapted. By Wednesday, she had changed her phone wallpaper to a burning dumpster gif and slapped a sticker on her laptop that read, "Not fired yet." The team loved it. William, of course, never mentioned it, but he saw it. Oh, he definitely saw it. Unbeknownst to Sarah, William had been watching her more than he'd like to admit. At first, it was amusement, then curiosity. He wasn't used to people like her. People who didn't flinch under pressure, who didn't kiss up, who didn't try to outsmart him but somehow kept up. There was something steady in her defiance, something that annoyed him and intrigued him. Thursday afternoon brought another test. He entered the main office space, approached her desk, and dropped a new folder with the usual grace of a firing squad. 90 minutes, he said, crisp and cool. She didn't look surprised, just smiled faintly. Is this part of your corporate wellness program? You know, the stress us till we snap initiative? He raised an eyebrow, said nothing. She grabbed the file, opened a fresh document, and began. 89 minutes later, she walked into his office with the translation in hand. Done, she said. Footnotes included. I even resisted the urge to hide insults in French. He took the folder, scanned the first few pages. His eyes didn't give anything away, but there was a half-second pause, a glitch in his usual rhythm that gave her a hint of satisfaction. Finally, he closed the file, set it down, and said the most William Smith phrase imaginable. Acceptable. Then he turned back to his computer, like the conversation was over. But it wasn't. Not really. Because as she turned to leave, she caught something in his expression. A flicker. A moment of stillness in the cold machinery of his demeanor. And Sarah knew. He was starting to see her differently. Maybe not as an equal, not yet. But definitely not as the clueless girl from the bathroom anymore. And that, in itself, felt like the beginning of a very dangerous game. Small changes. Quietly dangerous. Something had changed on the executive floor of Smith Enterprises, though no one could quite put their finger on it. It wasn't the lighting, or the temperature, or the hum of the printers. It was softer than that, quieter. It came in the form of a smile, one that seemed to linger even after its source had walked away. Attention had lifted, almost imperceptibly, like the loosening of a collar after a long, rigid day. People laughed more. They lingered by the windows. Even the elevator seemed to ding a little less aggressively. And in the middle of it all was Sarah. She never tried to be noticed. She wasn't loud or overly polished. But there was a natural brightness to her, something real that couldn't be rehearsed. When she laughed, she meant it. When she listened, she actually heard. And without trying, she had become the warm center of an office built around cold efficiency. William noticed. He'd tell himself he didn't, that it was just part of managing his staff, observing workflow, maintaining awareness. But it wasn't the way a manager watched. It was the way a man paused when he shouldn't have, when a voice in the hallway made him turn, even though he knew exactly who it belonged to. He watched her in passing, standing by the copier, showing someone how to rebind a broken folder, or offering a kind look to the overworked intern. He hated how natural she looked there, and he hated how he'd started to anticipate the sound of her heels in the corridor. So, as always, when something unnerved him, he responded with control. He made the assignments harder. Reports arrived on her desk with less prep time, vague instructions, tighter turnarounds. Meetings were rescheduled without notice. Calls were moved to 6 in the morning or 9 at night. And still, Sarah met every demand with the same calm determination. Not with arrogance, not with passive obedience, but with a quiet, stubborn kind of grace that frustrated him more than open defiance ever could. One day, passing the break room, William caught a glimpse of her in conversation with a junior analyst. She stood with one hand wrapped around a mug, her head tilted slightly, listening. And when the young man said something awkward, probably trying to be clever, she didn't roll her eyes. She smiled. Patient, gentle, and amused. That smile, That damn smile. William turned away quickly, jaw clenched, annoyed at himself for having noticed. And Sarah. Sarah felt the pressure mounting, of course. She wasn't blind. She saw the way the tasks piled up with surgical precision. She sensed the way William would linger just long enough in meetings to unsettle her, then disappear without comment. But instead of folding, she adapted. And if she had to fight her battles with grammar and polite sarcasm, so be it. She scribbled in the margins of her planner, "Not a war, just a very intense game of chess," and got back to work. So when Friday's executive leadership meeting rolled around, she was already seated behind William, ready to take notes, translate, and fade into the polished background. The room buzzed with quiet voices and the rustling of papers, as it always did, until, without lifting his gaze from the file in front of him, William spoke. "Miss Cole will accompany me on next week's international trip." The room went still. A few heads turned. Sarah didn't react outwardly, but her pen stopped for half a second, just long enough to register the shift in the air. She looked down again, composed. If William felt the silence that followed, he didn't show it. He simply continued with the itinerary, as if he hadn't just broken protocol and expectations in a single breath. He never looked at her. Not once. But Sarah felt it. She felt the weight of something unsaid passing between them. Quiet, but unmistakable. And he felt it too. Though he would never admit it, not even to himself. Something about that decision wasn't strategy. It wasn't logistics, it was instinct. And in that moment, he knew he'd invited something far more complicated than he intended. Something that didn't belong in his schedule, but had found its way in anyway. The ballroom shimmered beneath a canopy of chandeliers, glass catching light like water frozen in motion. Laughter floated in the air, clinking glasses danced in rhythm with soft jazz, and waiters moved like shadows in tuxedos. It was the kind of evening designed to impress. Strategic, polished, expensive. William Smith hated every second of it. He stood at the edge of the room, suit perfectly pressed, eyes scanning faces that blurred into one another. Deals were being whispered behind champagne flutes, power disguised as charm. But none of that held his attention. What stopped him, what truly stopped him, was the tray. A silver one, held steady by a white-gloved waiter. And on it, rows of bubbling champagne. He froze, mid-step. Just for a moment. Just long enough. His gaze locked on the glass. Pale gold, still trembling from movement. It was harmless. It was familiar. It was unbearable. He turned, sharp and silent, and slipped out the nearby glass doors onto the balcony. The noise fell away instantly, muffled behind walls of marble and money. Out here, it was quieter, cooler. The night breeze swept in from the city below, rustling the edges of his coat. Lights twinkled in distant windows like stars that had forgotten how to burn. He gripped the railing, knuckles pale. Not from anger, but something far heavier. Behind him, the door eased open. He didn't look. Sarah stepped out. She didn't speak. Not right away. Her heels clicked once, then stilled on the stone tile. She saw his shoulders, too still. His profile, too tense, and the silence, too full of something unsaid. When she did speak, her voice was quiet, unassuming. "I saw you stop," she said. He didn't answer. Her gaze drifted from him to the skyline. A plane blinked in the distance. Somewhere, someone was going home. He finally exhaled, and when he spoke, his voice was different. Lower, thinner, as if pulled from a part of him he rarely touched. "Champagne," he said simply. "It's always there, the worst moments of my life. And somehow, it's always there." He didn't look at her, but she listened anyway, fully, without urgency. The night I lost her, there were 3 glasses on the table. Only 2 were touched. Hers was still full. Sarah didn't ask who. She didn't press. And that was exactly why he kept going. She was supposed to be my wife, he said. And just like that, she wasn't. The world moved on. And I stayed. Silence. The wind moved again. A cooler gust this time, brushing Sarah's hair from her cheek. She stepped closer, but not too close. I don't need to know everything, she said softly. But if one day you want to tell someone, I'll be here. The words weren't heavy. They didn't demand or intrude. They were offered like a hand, open and waiting, not reaching. And finally, he turned to look at her. There was no gratitude in his eyes. Not yet. No tenderness either. But there was something else. Something more honest, confusion, resistance, and underneath it all, the faintest flicker of a man who'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen, without expectation. He held her gaze for a long moment, then said quietly, "You're the first person who's said that to me, in years." The elevator doors slid shut with a soft chime. Then came the silence, the kind that only luxury hotels manage to create. Padded walls, golden lighting, ambient music playing low like a whisper trying not to interrupt. Sarah leaned back slightly, clutching her bag. William stood to her right, checking his watch as the floors blinked downward. 14, 13, 12, and then everything stopped. A subtle jolt, a quiet mechanical click, then nothing. No movement, no music, no air circulation. The lights stayed on, but the elevator was no longer moving. Sarah stiffened. She turned toward the panel, pressed the button. Once, twice. Nothing. A flicker of panic passed through her eyes. This isn't happening, she murmured, pressing again, harder. It's just a stall, William said calmly, already reaching for the emergency phone. It'll reset. But it didn't. The line rang. Then a polite voice responded, confirming what neither of them wanted to hear. It could take up to an hour to fix the issue. Sarah's breath quickened. 1 hour. In a metal box with William Smith. She stepped back, bumping into the mirrored wall, eyes wide. I don't do well in small spaces. William turned, observed. You're sweating. Wow. Thanks, just pointing it out. Very observant of me. She shot him a glare that barely masked the rising fear. You think this is funny? No. I think this is unfortunate. And of course, she snapped, voice rising. It has to happen with you in the elevator. He smirked. You're implying this is my fault? I'm saying... She stopped. Her voice caught. She closed her eyes, focused on breathing. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. William watched her, then said, quieter this time, Sit down. You'll feel more grounded. I'm not sitting on a hotel elevator floor. Then panic elegantly. You're doing great so far. She barked a dry laugh, more out of nerves than humor, but the sarcasm helped. She pulled her hair back into a loose twist, trying to compose herself. Talk to me, she said. Anything. Just distract me. He hesitated. You want small talk? God, no. Anything but that. He shrugged. All right. Did you know most elevators are held up by 8 steel cables, but only 1 is needed to hold the full weight? She blinked. Why would you think that's helpful right now? Perspective. She opened her mouth to respond, and that's when the floor gave a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor. She gasped. Lost balance. William caught her, one hand wrapped around her upper arm, the other steadying her waist. Suddenly, the space between them vanished. Inches became millimeters. She was close enough to see the faint scar at the edge of his jawline, to feel the way his chest rose slightly faster than before. His eyes met hers. No jokes now. No shields. The air between them tightened, heavy with something they hadn't dared name. Neither moved, neither spoke. Her fingers rested lightly against his shoulder. His hand lingered longer than necessary at her waist. A slow, dangerous pause. Her lips parted. Not to speak, just in reaction. And then, ding. The elevator jerked softly. The lights returned to full brightness. The doors slid open with a cheerful tone that didn't match the weight of the moment. Sarah pulled back first. Fast, fixing her blouse, swallowing hard. William adjusted his cuff. Neither looked at the other as they stepped out. But as they reached the hallway, he paused, turned. His voice was lower than before, less guarded. "I should be afraid of you," he said, "but I can't stop thinking about you." Then he turned again, walked away, and left her standing there. Heart still pounding, breath still uneven, and absolutely unsure of what had just changed between them, but knowing something had. The room shimmered with low light and expensive ambition. Crystal glasses sparkled. Strings played somewhere in the background, and men in dark suits talked business like it was war. Sarah stood at the edge of it all, clutching a glass of sparkling water, scanning the crowd out of habit more than interest. Then she felt it. A presence. Too close, too intentional. Thomas Bradford, one of the more persistent investors. Silver hair, perfect teeth, and the kind of confidence that made you wish there were more exits in the room. "You know," he said, voice just low enough to be suggestive, "you have this way about you, not like the others here, a softness." Sarah gave a practiced smile. "Thank you, but I'm really just here to do my job." He leaned in slightly. "Your job doesn't have to end tonight." Her smile faded, and just as she stepped back, a hand appeared at her waist. Steady, possessive, she turned and froze. "William," his voice was calm, cold, lethal. "She's with me." Bradford blinked. "Excuse me?" William didn't repeat himself. He didn't need to. Then, without warning, without permission, he turned to Sarah, cupped the side of her face, and kissed her. It wasn't polite. It wasn't planned. It was hungry, fierce, reckless, the kind of kiss that silences a room and ignites every nerve at once. For a second, Sarah didn't react. Her eyes widened, then fluttered shut. Her fingers gripped the front of his jacket, not out of romance, but instinct, like bracing against a wave too strong to stand through. And then, just as suddenly as it began, he pulled back. Silence. No more strings, no more voices, just the sound of her heart pounding in her chest. She looked at him, and his face had changed. Gone was the fire, the intensity. In its place, regret, calculation, fear. He stepped back. Just enough. "That," he said hoarsely, "was a mistake." Her breath caught. "What?" "I shouldn't have." He didn't finish. "You kissed me," she whispered, her voice shaking. "And now it's a mistake?" "I crossed a line." Her hands dropped from his jacket like they burned. She took a step back, disbelief hardening into fury. "You don't get to do that," she said louder now. "You don't get to touch me like that, kiss me like that, and then throw it in the trash 5 seconds later." William's jaw clenched. It wasn't meant to happen. "But it did," her voice cracked. "And don't act like you felt nothing." He turned away, one hand dragging through his hair, the other clenched at his side, knuckles white. He looked like a man who wanted to punch the wall, but was too used to boardrooms to let himself break. "I can't do this," he said under his breath. "Do what, William?" she asked, bitter. "Feel something real?" His silence was the answer. Sarah's throat tightened. She stared at him. This man who could run a company, command a room, stare down billion-dollar contracts, but couldn't face his own heart. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just straightened her shoulders and walked away. And he let her. He stood there, breathing hard, while the room behind him came back to life. Music, chatter, the sound of 100 deals pretending they had meaning. The only sound that mattered now was the echo of her heels, fading down the corridor. The next morning, Sarah opened her inbox. Her fingers trembled. Subject, HR confirmation. Resignation accepted. Signed, William Smith, CEO. She stared at the screen, and for a long time didn't move. Airports have a strange kind of silence, loud with noise but hollow with absence. Somewhere above the glass ceiling, a plane was already slicing through the clouds. Below, travelers moved like currents, purposeful, fast, with too much luggage and not enough time. Sarah stood alone at gate 27. Her coat was folded over one arm. Her carry-on rested by her feet, and in her hand, a one-way ticket to somewhere far enough to forget. The loudspeaker called boarding group B, but she didn't move. Her eyes were dry, but her heart was bruised in places that didn't show. She kept replaying the kiss, that kiss, and the words that followed it like a slap. That was a mistake. She had survived worse. She would survive this, and then, a sound behind her. Footsteps, fast, urgent, then a voice. Sarah. She turned, and for a second she forgot how to breathe. William was running, not walking, not striding like the composed CEO he always was, but running, through the terminal, his coat flaring behind him, eyes locked only on her. He dodged suitcases, brushed past strangers, ignored the startled looks. By the time he reached her, he was breathless, not from the distance, but from everything unsaid between them. He didn't wait, didn't stall. He dropped to one knee, right there, in the middle of the terminal, on cold airport tile, surrounded by 100 blinking departure signs and 1,000 strangers. From the inside of his jacket pocket, he pulled out a ring box, opened it, held it up. "Sarah Cole," he said, voice rough, eyes shining. "You changed everything." She didn't speak, didn't move, but her eyes filled slowly. "I spent years controlling everything," he continued. "My company, my emotions, every minute of my damn life. And then you came in, carrying a coffee you didn't finish, wearing the wrong badge, walking into the wrong restroom, and somehow, you became the only thing that ever felt right." A quiet gasp rippled through the crowd. Phones were coming out. Strangers were already filming. But William didn't care. "For the first time," he said, "I don't want control. I don't want plans. I don't want safe." He looked up at her. "I just want you." She covered her mouth with her hand. "Marry me, Sarah," he whispered. "Not because it makes sense, not because it's perfect, but because when I'm with you, I actually want to live." A long silence. Then her voice, low, trembling, raw. "If you hurt me again," she whispered, eyes brimming, "I swear I will walk into that boardroom, fire you in front of everyone, and run this company better than you ever did." He smiled through a laugh. "Fair, because I'm not fragile, William. I'm not waiting to be saved, I know," he said softly. "That's why I love you." Her shoulders shook as a tear finally fell. And then she nodded. He stood, slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that shook more than he'd like to admit, and pulled her into him like the world was ending and she was the only thing worth saving. The airport erupted in applause. A few strangers wiped their eyes. Somewhere, someone shouted, "Say yes again, just for the video!" But Sarah didn't hear them. Because in that moment, against all odds, against every scar, they had found their way back, and neither of them was ever going to let go again. It started with a line. faint, pink, blinking up at Sarah from a little white stick on a Tuesday morning. She stared at it for a long time, standing barefoot in the quiet of their apartment, with sunlight barely touching the edge of the marble counter. The world didn't shift, but her heart did. Just slightly. William was in the other room, making coffee, still in his undershirt, hair messy in a way that would never be allowed in the boardroom. She stepped into the kitchen, still holding the test. He looked up. Her eyes met his, and that was all it took. He froze, reading her expression before she spoke. His hand slowly lowered the coffee mug to the counter. "Is it?" She nodded. Then came the most unexpected thing of all. He laughed, loud, breathless, boyish laughter, the kind he hadn't let out in years. He crossed the kitchen in 2 steps, wrapped his arms around her, lifted her clean off the floor. "I'm going to be a dad," he whispered into her neck, over and over, like the words were a spell that made everything real. Months passed in a blur of joy and learning curves. William, CEO of Smith Enterprises, master of mergers, slayer of deadlines, was now awkwardly balancing a parenting book in one hand and a baby-sized onesie in the other. He practiced swaddling a pillow on the living room couch, gently patting it as if afraid it might break. "You're doing it upside down," Sarah would say, giggling. "I'm improvising," he'd counter, half defensive, half adoring. And every morning, without fail, he placed her favorite coffee, decaf now, on her nightstand before she woke. They got married quietly, a garden ceremony, just close friends, warm sunlight, and a string quartet playing something soft in the background. Sarah wore a simple ivory dress that hugged her gently growing belly. William wore a dark blue suit and a look in his eyes that said, "This is the beginning I never knew I needed. No headlines, no drama, just vows exchanged with trembling voices and a kiss that spoke of every hardship they'd overcome." The ultrasound appointment came a week later. The room was dim, cold gel on her belly, the rhythmic beep of machines. William sat beside her, holding her hand. His thumb ran small circles along her wrist, nervous but quiet. And then, there it was. A flicker, a blur, a heartbeat, fast, steady, alive. The doctor smiled. "There's your baby." William didn't say anything at first. He just stared at the screen. Then his voice cracked slightly as he whispered, "The CEO of $1 billion company just got knocked flat by a heartbeat the size of a lima bean." Sarah smiled at him, eyes glassy. "She already has you wrapped around her little finger." "She?" he asked. She shrugged. "I've got a feeling." That night, as she lay curled on their bed, back pressed into his chest, his hand resting protectively over her stomach, he whispered into her hair, "If she's a girl, I'm going to teach her that love isn't weakness. That loving someone like you, strong, stubborn, full of fire, is the best decision any man can ever make." Sarah didn't answer. She just reached back, laced her fingers with his, and held on tight. Because for the first time in a long time, she wasn't running, he wasn't hiding, and the life growing between them wasn't just a baby. It was proof that even the most unexpected beginnings can lead to the softest, sweetest kind of forever. The hospital room was far from glamorous, but nothing else mattered, because this was the moment. Sarah screamed, gripping the bed, sweat and tears blurring her vision. "If you ever touch me again, William, I swear." He winced, smiling. "You said that at the wedding, too." And then, the baby cried. A tiny, perfect sound that stopped the world. The nurse gently placed the newborn girl in Sarah's arms. William stood frozen, overcome. When she passed him their daughter, something inside him broke open and began to heal. "I thought I'd forgotten how to love," he whispered. "But then you came along." Later, As dawn touched the sky, Sarah looked at him with a soft smile. Who would have thought a wrong turn into the men's bathroom would give me a family? He laughed through quiet tears and held her hand tight. They hadn't just fallen in love. They'd built a life. Together. Let us know. How would you rate this story on a scale from 1 to 10? Every comment, every rating helps us craft the next story. Better, deeper, and closer to your heart. If it felt like you just lived through this journey with the characters, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and stay with us for more unforgettable stories. Because here, we don't just tell stories, we hold on to the feelings you thought were lost. See you in the next chapter.